Yes, you heard that right. Stop being nice. Not because you should be rude, cold, or unkind, but because being nice often means being a people pleaser, avoiding conflict, saying yes when you want to say no, and putting your own needs last. We've confused niceness with goodness. But niceness is often a mask, a polite performance we put on to be liked, to be accepted, to avoid rocking the boat. In doing so, we shrink ourselves, we silence our truth, we compromise our boundaries. At first glance, nice and kind might seem like the same thing, but they come from two very different places, and they lead to two very different outcomes. Niceness is often performative. It's a surface level behavior driven by the desire to be liked, to fit in, or to avoid confrontation. It's the smile you wear even when you're uncomfortable. It's the polite yes when everything in your body is screaming no. It's the compliment you give, not because you mean it, but because you want to be seen as agreeable. Niceness is shaped by external approval. It's about how others see you. Kindness, on the other hand, is rooted in integrity and strength. It doesn't always look pretty. Sometimes kindness means telling someone a hard truth they need to hear. Sometimes it means saying no, clearly and firmly, because you respect your own time and energy. Sometimes it means stepping away from a toxic situation, not because you're cold, but because you refuse to betray yourself anymore. Kindness is not about smoothing things over. It's about being honest, compassionate, and courageous. It's choosing what is right over what is comfortable. Think about it. A kind person will hold you accountable. A nice person will let you spiral just to avoid an awkward conversation. A kind leader will give you tough feedback to help you grow. A nice leader will stay silent while you make the same mistakes again and again. One empowers. So no, being nice doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you more agreeable and often more invisible. Kindness might ruffle some feathers, but it leads to respect, growth, and real connection. And it starts with being kind to yourself first, even if that means disappointing others sometimes. When you're focused on being nice, you often sacrifice honesty, not just with others, but with yourself. We're taught from a young age to be polite, to keep the peace, to not hurt anyone's feelings. And while those intentions sound noble, they can slowly teach us to suppress our true thoughts, needs, and boundaries. You find yourself nodding in agreement when you actually disagree. You say it's fine when it absolutely isn't. You pretend to be okay with things that are eating away at you from the inside, all because you don't want to be difficult. But here's the hard truth. When you do that, you're not being nice. You're being you're lying to avoid discomfort. You're putting on a mask. And over time, that mask becomes so heavy, it starts to shape your identity. You start forgetting what you really think, what you really feel, what you actually want, because your life has become a performance aimed at pleasing others. Think about the number of times you've said yes out of guilt, not because you truly wanted to. How many times have you agreed with someone just to avoid conflict, even when it went against your values? That's not kindness. That's self-abandonment. That's fear dressed up as politeness. And dishonesty doesn't only damage your relationship with yourself, it affects everyone around you. When you're not expressing your true feelings, others can't trust what you say. They think everything's okay when it's not. They believe your silence is consent when it's actually quiet resentment. They rely on your yes, not knowing it was given under pressure. Over time, this builds confusion, tension, and emotional distance. Authenticity is the foundation of real trust. Without it, your relationships become fragile and performative, just like your niceness. Being nice often turns into a habit of saying yes to everything and everyone, and that habit comes at a cost. You become the go-to person, the dependable one, the helper, the one who's always available. And at first, That might feel good. You feel useful, appreciated, maybe even admired. But underneath that praise is a dangerous pattern. You're constantly putting other people's needs before your own. You give your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth, not because you always want to, but because you feel like you have to. You don't want to upset anyone. You don't want to seem selfish. You don't want to let anyone down. So you keep showing up, even when you're tired, even when your plate is full, even when your mind and body are screaming for rest. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the exhaustion sets in. Not just physical tiredness, but emotional fatigue. You start feeling resentful, overwhelmed, depleted. Your motivation slips. Your joy fades. You feel like you're running on fumes. But you keep going because what if they need me? Or they'll be disappointed if I say no. This is how people-pleasing becomes burnout. It's death by 1,000 small compromises. It's saying I'm fine when you're not. It's constantly overriding your own needs for the sake of being agreeable, helpful, or easy to deal with. What's worse is that this cycle becomes self-reinforcing. The more you give, the more people expect. The more available you are, the more others take for granted that you'll always be there. You become the emotional crutch, the overworker, the fixer, and slowly lose yourself in the process. And burnout doesn't just affect your energy levels, it distorts your sense of self-worth. You begin to believe that your value lies only in what you can offer others, not in who you are. You feel guilty when you rest. You feel selfish when you say no. You feel like a bad person when you set boundaries. But here's the truth. Constantly pleasing others doesn't make you a good person. It makes you a ghost in your own life. One of the most overlooked consequences of being nice all the time is that eventually you start to lose respect, not just from other people, but from yourself. And that's a heavy price to pay for keeping the peace. When you're overly focused on being agreeable, avoiding conflict, and putting others first, you might think you're making yourself more likable, but often the opposite happens. People start to notice that you don't stand up for yourself, that you always say yes, even when it's inconvenient, that you let things slide, even when they're unfair. And slowly, whether consciously or not, they begin to treat you accordingly, not as an equal, but as someone they can dismiss, override, or take for granted. Why? Because respect is rooted in boundaries, clarity, and strength, not in passivity. When you constantly bend to accommodate others, you signal that your needs are secondary, that your time, energy, and opinions are flexible, negotiable, or even irrelevant. And when people sense that, they stop taking you seriously. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's subtle. They interrupt you mid-sentence, and you laugh it off. They pile on extra work, and you say no problem, even though you're drowning. They make a comment that crosses a line, and instead of addressing it, you smile awkwardly and change the subject. All of these moments might seem small, but together, they paint a picture that you're not someone who commands respect. You're someone who avoids tension at all costs. And perhaps even more damaging is what happens internally. Every time you silence your truth, every time you shrink to make someone comfortable, every time you betray your own boundaries for the sake of being liked, you chip away at your self-respect. It's like an invisible wound. You know deep down that you're not being true to yourself, and that dissonance begins to show up in your confidence, your self-esteem, and even your relationships. You might start feeling bitter, frustrated, or unappreciated, but the real frustration is with yourself, because you know you're not speaking up, not showing up, not holding your own line. Respect isn't something you demand loudly. It's something you build quietly, through consistency, through clarity, through action. It begins the moment you decide that your voice, your values, and your boundaries matter, and that being nice, at the cost of your dignity, is no longer a price you're willing to pay. There's a painful truth that many nice people eventually learn the hard way. When you constantly try to be agreeable, flexible, and accommodating. You become a target, not just for more requests, but for manipulation, guilt tripping, and emotional exploitation. It's not because being nice is inherently bad. It's because people who are always nice tend to blur their own boundaries. They say yes even when they want to say no. They give people the benefit of the doubt over and over again. They avoid confrontation even when they're clearly being mistreated. They want to believe in the best in people, sometimes to the point of ignoring red flags. And unfortunately, not everyone deserves that level of generosity. There are people in this world, in workplaces, in friendships, in families, who will see your niceness, not as a virtue, but as a weakness. They'll test your limits. They'll ask for more than they should. They'll push, manipulate, and guilt you, knowing you're unlikely to push back. You become the safe person to dump extra work on, the one who always picks up the slack, the one who listens for hours, but never gets asked how you're doing, the one who's constantly giving while others are taking and taking and taking. Over time, this dynamic becomes lopsided. You start to feel used, but also trapped. Because you've built a reputation for being so nice, it can feel almost impossible to change the rules. You worry that setting boundaries will make you seem cold. You fear that saying no will disappoint someone. So you continue giving your time, your energy, your emotional labor, even when it's costing you your mental health. And here's the thing. The people who take advantage of nice individuals often count on speaking up, that you won't make a scene, that you'll swallow your This makes it incredibly easy for toxic patterns to take root. Patterns where your kindness is exploited. Your empathy, your intelligentism, because the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to reclaim it. You start to internalize the idea that your role is to serve, support, and smooth things over, even when it's hurting you. And the people around you may never realize how deeply you're struggling, because you've worked so hard to maintain the image of being fine, being easygoing, being the but just because you're not saying anything doesn't mean you're okay. In a world where so much energy is spent on image, presentation, and saying the right thing, authenticity has become a rare and powerful quality. And yet many people still choose niceness over authenticity because it feels safer. Niceness is predictable. It keeps conversations smooth, avoids awkward moments, and ensures you're perceived as polite, agreeable, and easy to be around. But that comfort comes at a cost, your truth. When you prioritize being nice over being real, you start censoring your thoughts. You filter your emotions. You water yourself down to fit in, to be liked, to not ruffle feathers. The problem is when you're always trying to be what others want, you're no longer being who you truly are. Authenticity, on the other hand, is rooted in self-respect. It's not about being loud, aggressive, or unfiltered. It's about being honest. It means expressing how you really feel, even when it's uncomfortable. It means standing by your values, even when they go against the crowd. It means being consistent, not just agreeable, so people know where you stand and can trust your word. When you choose authenticity over niceness, you allow others to connect with the real you, not the version you think they want. This kind of openness creates stronger, more meaningful relationships. People aren't guessing where you stand or wondering if you actually mean what you say. There's no second guessing, no walking on eggshells, no decoding mixed signals, because what they see is what they get. It also empowers others to be authentic with you. When you're honest, it gives others permission to do the same. That's how trust is built, not through sugarcoating or keeping things polite, but through real, raw, and respectful communication. But being authentic takes courage. It means risking judgment, criticism, or even rejection. Not everyone will like your truth. Not everyone will celebrate your boundaries or understand your values. And that's okay, because the goal is not to be universally liked. The goal is to live in alignment with who you are. Niceness often prioritizes comfort, both yours and others. Authenticity prioritizes integrity. And while it may lead to more friction in the short term, it leads to far more clarity, peace, and self-confidence in the long run. You stop seeking validation from others because you're no longer pretending. You're no longer twisting yourself into someone you're not just to fit in. You're showing up fully, flaws, opinions, feelings, and all, and saying, "This is me." One of the most misunderstood aspects of personal growth is the concept of boundaries. People often think that setting boundaries is cold, selfish, or mean, especially if you've been conditioned to be nice your whole life. But the truth is, boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are bridges that teach others how to treat you with respect. Nice people often struggle with boundaries because they fear they'll offend someone, disappoint others, or come across as difficult. So instead of saying no, they say maybe. Instead of speaking up, they stay silent. Instead of expressing what they need, they hope others will somehow just figure it out. But the reality is, people can't read your mind. And when you don't clearly communicate your limits, people will naturally assume there are none. This is how resentment begins to build. You agree to things you don't want to do. You stay in conversations that drain you. You give your time and energy even when you're running on empty. And all the while, you tell yourself, "It's not a big deal," or "I don't want to make it awkward," or "I'll just deal with it." But inside, a slow burn begins, a quiet frustration that eats away at your peace and your self-worth. Boundaries are not about controlling other people. They're about protecting yourself. They are a form of self-respect, a declaration that your needs, time, and feelings matter. When you set a boundary, you're not being unkind. You're being clear. You're saying, "I value this relationship enough to be honest about what works for me and what doesn't." And here's where the power comes in. When you set and uphold your boundaries, something shifts internally. You stop seeking permission to take care of yourself. You stop feeling guilty for choosing rest, space, or silence. You realize that you can be compassionate without being a doormat, generous without being depleted, helpful without being used. Others may not always like your boundaries, especially if they benefited from your lack of them. But the people who truly value you will respect your limits. And the ones who don't, they reveal themselves the moment you stop being endlessly available. What's most powerful, though, is how boundaries change the way you see yourself. Every time you say no, when you mean it, you reinforce your own worth. Every time you express a need or speak a truth, you strengthen your inner trust. You no longer need to bend, shrink, or overextend just to keep others happy. You start living from a place of alignment, not obligation. And that kind of inner stability is where real power begins.